Matt Walsh and Jillian Michaels had a debate recently discussing the topics of marriage and homosexuality, and I wanted to compliment them first because they did a great job representing themselves and who they are as people. However, their representation of their understanding of the topics did not go nearly as well. But before I get into that, let's show a small clip of where the errors started.
Everything I find is matrimony or wedlock, culturally, often legally recognized union between two people called spouses. It establishes rights and obligations between them, as well as them and their children, if any, between them and their in laws. What is the definition that you have that's outside of what's in the dictionary?
So at minute 240, Jillian makes her first mistake by appealing to the dictionary definition as a source of authority on both the English language and as an authority on the definition of marriage, when she essentially asks Matt, how could your definition be better than what is in the dictionary? This is a very common misunderstanding called a fallacy of definition. The dictionary is actually not an authority on the English language. The dictionary is not created by God's, selected team of the world's most renowned linguists for any given language. The dictionary is just created by an organization that is doing its best to keep track of how words are most often used in the English language, both past and present. So the dictionary is just a lexical catalog of common definition used for various words. But when you are discussing specific topics, such as like within philosophy, theology, psychology, and many other fields of study, we often have to use more precise terminology. And since Matt and Jillian are having a philosophical conversation about what the definition of marriage should truly objectively be, it is inappropriate for her to appeal to the dictionary.
Marriage codifies, protects, uh, sanctifies the inherently procreative union of a man and a woman.
Okay,
And
that's for you, though.
it's first of all, it's not just for me, it's for society since the dawn of human civilization until approximately 15 seconds ago.
So at about minute 320, Walsh states that the union of man and woman has been inherently procreative since the invention of society. And there are six problems with this type of argument that he's making here. First and second, this kind of argument commits both the naturalistic and the is-ought fallacy. You cannot define the way people should operate simply based on how they previously or presently operate. People have been doing all kinds of weird and dumb stuff since the beginning of time, so simply stating what people used to do doesn't explain why they should continue to do so. The why is the important part. It's the logical part of the explanation for why that behavior should continue, not the fact that some behavior frequently occurred in the past. Third, people did not have as many options to prevent pregnancy in the past, so appealing to the tendency for our past sexual relations to cause procreation doesn't really represent the will of what humans actually wanted to occur. Is there any real doubt that people in the past would have liked to have sex without the risk of having children? So, our desire to suppress this consequence of our sexual behavior has always been present, but we just didn't have the same capacity to do so until recently. This ties back into the naturalistic fallacy I previously mentioned. It is a fallacy to attempt to draw moral conclusions simply based on the fact that certain behaviors and outcomes occur naturally in the past or present. Fourth, Matt's claim that male and female unions are inherently procreative doesn't actually address the issue of infertile couples, and Matt actually has made an absolutely horrendous attempt to address this issue in the past. And when he previously attempted to respond to this issue of whether or not it was wrong for people to continue their marriage when infertile, he basically stated that he wouldn't frown upon people in that position to continue being married, even though they couldn't procreate. So he basically did his best to not answer the question, and by attempting to avoid the question, he pretty much revealed his answer to us. And that answer is that his beliefs are basically directly contradictory because he's obviously perfectly fine with people having marital sexual relationships if they're infertile, which contradicts his belief that marriage is inherently procreative. He's being willfully ignorant and avoiding difficult questions. As for my fifth counterpoint, I think Matt's own Bible demonstrates that history has not shown that our sexual relationships have always been procreative in nature. Even the Bible shows that people have been engaging in all kinds of sexual activity and sexual unions, for better or for worse, since the beginning of time. Obviously, the Bible frowns upon some of those activities, but it doesn't attempt to deny what's always been present. Sixth, since the dawn of society, religious people have been killing homosexuals. So homosexual unions have always been something that people had to live in fear of because of people with belief systems like Matt Walsh. It's not that the desire to have homosexual unions wasn't always present. It's not that people have always unanimously agreed that homosexual unions are bad for society. It's that empowered religious people groups have basically murdered this behavior since the beginning of society.
And so I think it makes sense for society to say, well, this is a different kind of thing. And this is frankly more important than any of these other kinds of relationships because of the power that it has. And so we are going to call that something else, and we are going to protect it in a way that we don't protect other relationships because those other relationships do not have this capacity.
So here at minute 6, Matt Walsh is struggling to convey his point that he basically believes society should be deeply invested in protecting the so-called sanctity of heterosexual relationships because only those allow society to grow. But there's a problem here because he's making a big assumption on behalf of society, which is that we should always be trying to grow, ad infinitum, which I, for one, absolutely dread. I'm not interested in sharing the freeway with another 8 billion people on top of the 8 billion who already exist. And I'm also not saying that, that the ability to reproduce isn't unique and doesn't have any value whatsoever. It is a unique thing to heterosexual marriages, and it is a unique point of value. But it's a very different issue altogether to go from saying that heterosexual marriages have a unique capacity to provide that kind of value to then say, well, because of that unique capacity, therefore only heterosexual marriages should be protected or be considered marriages altogether. That just doesn't follow. I'm not not seeing it, Matt.
And I get why you feel like, hey, you're threatening what I have that's special. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. And I wish there was a way for me to make you
But
not feel
it's
diminished.
not you threatening, it's the societal recognition um, of it as a marriage. They're trying to equate it with what I would consider to be true marriage. That becomes uh, the threat, if you will, if that's the language you want to use.
So here from minute 840 to 909, Jillian tries to explain to Matt that the way she sees her secular homosexual marriage isn't supposed to be an attack on Matt's definition. And Matt's response is that he thinks society is trying to attack his special religious view of marriage. This is a misperception caused by Abrahamic religions viewing the world from within their own social theological bubble. Now, this might be true for some people who are anti theists or hate Christianity, but most human beings are just heterosexual creatures trying to live their life and just so happen to be born desiring relationships with the opposite sex. The average person is not deeply invested in trying to tell Christians what they think the Christian definition of marriage should be. They just want to be able to do their own thing and enjoy the legal benefits associated with that. It's Abrahamic religions who are the people groups who initiated this conflict over the definition of acceptable marriage within society. That's the reason why homosexual marriage was banned for so long and why they've had to fight back to gain the legal privilege to call themselves married. If Christians would have just backed off and minded their own business, there would not be this big conflict over marriage and sexuality that we see today. And the vast majority of people wouldn't give half a damn if Christians had their own exclusive marital practice and definition. Abrahamic religions are the main source of the conflict across the entire planet on this issue. I know I just said some things that are going to probably piss a lot of people off, but so here's where I'm going to back off for a minute to make sure people understand exactly what I'm saying because people tend to view ideas in relation to other ideas. I'm talking mainly about how Christianity influenced the marriage debate in the US right now. I'm not blaming Christians for every single LGBTQ topic under the sun. But you guys absolutely have had a gas can in your hand throughout the entirety of the homosexual marriage debate throughout US history. Think about how your attempts to suppress others have motivated their feelings. Stop looking at yourselves like innocent victims. You've made this legal debate a much bigger mess than it had to be.
The institution of the family is the bedrock of human civilization. Um, Marriage is the bedrock of the family. And
At minute 9:45, Matt says, the family is the bedrock of civilization and marriage is the bedrock of the family. I would argue that positive relational unions are the bedrock Matt is referring to, not necessarily heterosexual marriages. Matt's perspective is only correct to the extent that you perceive heterosexual relationships to be cumulatively positive throughout our cultural history. Uh, that's definitely not true for me. Both my wife and I have come from several generations of physically or emotionally abusive marriages, which I would not want to use as the bedrock for society. And I'm sure there are many, many, many of you out there who are in the same boat. I'm talking about, America's history of men returning from wars with PTSD and drinking problems, then proceeding to beat the crap out of their families. So Matt has some very rose-colored lenses on when he thinks about what traditional Christian marriage represents to our society.
even in societies that practice polygamy, in fact, for them, procreation was so much the point that that's part of the reason why they had polygamy was so they could create even more kids.
At minute 14, Matt basically states that even where polygamy has been practiced, the primary purpose of those unions has been to create more children. I think this just doesn't fully represent, and or fairly represent the significance that reproduction played in the past. Obviously, Earth used to be a much harsher place to live in, and if you didn't have children, especially male children back in the days, before retirements and social benefits came around, you were probably screwed once you reached old age. There's just so much complexity to the topic of how and why families have historically functioned the way they did, and not all of those issues apply to modern life. But Matt does not seem to account for these issues when he appeals to the past the way he does, which again is why so much of what he says either implicitly or directly violates the naturalistic and is-ought fallacies.
That's it. I see it as,
How would you define marriage?
well, I mean, I would go with these literal definitions. So, the state of being united as spouses in a consensual and contractual relationship recognized by law. That is literally how I define it. And also called matrimony or wedlock, culturally and often legally recognized union.
Do you recognize at least that removing the family, removing the creation of children from the definition entirely
What
means
about
that
the couples that
means that
don't
you have
have
it means that
kids?
it means you have a definition there that is, would you at least recognize
Okay.
that it is unprecedented in the history of human civilization?
Here at minute 16, we see Matt becoming hyper-focused on reiterating his previous arguments. He asks Jillian to provide her own definition of marriage, and she cites the dictionary once and again, but he doesn't actually offer any criticism of the definition she provides. Instead, he simply asks if she can recognize that removing the creation of children from the definition of marriage is unprecedented in human civilization. So this isn't a criticism, this is a complaint that she offered a definition that was inconvenient for him and one that he and society isn't accustomed to. And he once again commits the same fallacies I've already discussed. So I'm not going to reiterate why this commits the naturalistic and is-ought fallacies again, but I will argue that removing child creation from the definition of marriage actually is not an attack on the historical definition of marriage. It would be more accurate to say that removing children is more like an attack on the historical definition of a family. Marriage is not historically certified through the creation of children. The closest we got to forcing children into the definition of marriage was when, newlywed queens were forced to consummate in front of family members. But that is still most directly tied to sex, which does not even come close to guaranteeing children occur during the marital union.
I could say that it's natural, it's in our nature for a human being to be born with two legs. Um, there are humans that are born without them. That doesn't mean they're not human, but there's something has gone wrong, and so they were not able to fully participate in that aspect of being a human, unfortunately. But that doesn't challenge the nature of what it means to be human. And I would say that one of the natural the nature of marriage is procreative, and even though you have men and women who get together and turns out they can't have kids, tragically, it doesn't challenge the
Who may
nature of what
not
marriage is.
want to have.
At minute 18, Matt attempts to create an analogy between being born without legs and having a marriage without conception. And remember what I said earlier on this topic. He's tried to do this before, and you can see his attempts continuously end up a dumpster fire. Matt is essentially saying that just as being born without legs doesn't make you non human, having a marriage without children doesn't mean that you don't have a marriage. It just means you didn't fully participate in the definition of marriage. So, using Matt's logic, a childless marriage would be like having a partial marriage, which he obviously experiences no moral conflict with. He's not bothered by a childless married couple because deep down he knows there's nothing morally wrong with it.
But if you are a believer, why would God create something that's wrong? Historically speaking, even if you look at the animal kingdom, there have been gay animals.
So at minute 19, Jillian asks Matt, why would God create something that is not okay, referring to homosexuals? That is an issue that deserves a video of its own, but I'm going to point out something real quick here. Christians actually have no issue with God creating something that is not okay because the sin is connected to the decision, not your nature. So Christians will forgive and accept you for being homosexual so long as you choose to live heterosexually. From their perspective, God created humans with all kinds of sinful desires, and homosexuality is just one of many desires that are only problematic if you act on it. The reason why liberals get stuck on this issue and fail to understand this simple concept when it comes to discussing sexuality with Christians is because obviously sexuality is a much more difficult desire to deal with than probably any other sinful desire a Christian might think of.
Totally agnostic. Uh, I
You're
wasn't.
agnostic, but you believe in God.
I believe in more agnostic. Okay, so my understanding of atheist, I don't believe in anything. Agnostic, I do believe in something. I don't know exactly what it looks like. I wasn't raised with an organized religion because my mother was Jewish and my father was Greek Orthodox. So I think both of them felt like, you know what, she'll figure it out. Um, I love science. I like listening to astrophysicists talk about the universe and you know that stuff really to me is proof of God when I hear about that
This is
stuff.
going to be the last clip I review. At minute 1930, Jillian attempts to explain her definition of agnostic, which is definitely not even close to correct. Agnostics just don't believe it is possible to know if God does or does not exist. There is no spirituality attached to it. Jillian's definition doesn't even meet the definition of deist. Jillian is something closer to what we would currently describe as spiritual. She has pulled a undefined God out of her rectum that has no real evidence or basis in reality outside of her own feelings.